ओम अज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। नमो ओम विष्णुपादाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिनिति नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषा शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासदि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। So here this verse is the explanation of the material pangs suffered by living entity. Root cause of suffering is ignorance. And we in the material world constantly increase this ignorance with our foolish activities. So, if we see, it is out of ignorance that ahankara is created. The mind is the product of Rajoguna, Sattva-guna. Buddhi is from Sattva-guna. And this false identification, it comes from ignorance. So here, how the living entity is first bound by ignorance in thinking that I am this material body. Which is made up of Panchabhuta. Actually, the pure living entity has no connection with anything material. But when the living entity misuses his freedom, free will, this energy of the Lord, Maya Shakti, covers his real knowledge. Otherwise, the living entity in his original position is Krishna conscious. He is filled with knowledge. He is of the same nature as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As it is said in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishna bahirmukha jeev bhoga vancha kare. When the living entity develops a desire to enjoy, bhoga vancha kare, independent of the Supreme Lord. That is why it is said bahirmukha, not in relation with Krishna. Then the Lord arranges nikatasthe maya tare jhapatiya dhare. Immediately he is put under the energy of the Lord called maya. And as the definition maya, Prabhupada explains, this energy of the Lord, it covers the real knowledge of the living entity and convinces him, makes him to believe that which he is not. We are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. We are spirit soul. So, this knowledge that I am part and parcel of the Supreme Lord and that I am spirit, I am Sat, I am Chit, I am Ananda, it becomes covered by ignorance. So, Chaitanya Charita Amrita also explains that Maya has two different potencies which acts on the living entity. One is called Avaranatmika, another is called Prakshepatmika. With Avaranatmika, the living entity's original consciousness, his original understanding and knowledge is covered. And Prakshepatmika is when the living entity wants to come out of Maya in order to go back to his original consciousness, then Maya Shakti tries to pull him down back into ignorance. That is why we find, even though sometimes after reading Srila Prabhupada's book, we come to Krishna consciousness, but sometimes we become influenced by Maya and we are pulled back in our old material activities. That is called Prakshepatmika Shakti. So, Prabhupada explains there are three very important aspects in Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada wanted his disciples to write articles for Back to Godhead magazine. And Prabhupada, he gave guidance that the first and foremost pillar of our Godhead magazine should be to remove this ignorance from the living entity that he is this material body. That is how we find wherever Srila Prabhupada went, with scientific arguments, with shastric arguments, with logic, Prabhupada propagated and made people to understand how we are not this material body. So this is a very important thing. So there are three things in Krishna consciousness. One is to understand sambandha. Second is abhideya. And third is prayojana. So this is a part of sambandha jnana. Trying to understand our relationship with the Supreme Lord. That actually, I am part of the Supreme Lord. I am not part of this material world. So first of all, avidya has to be removed. So when ignorance is removed, automatically the living entity regains his original consciousness. It is this ignorance which is actually covering the real knowledge of the living entity that he is part and parcel of Krishna. So Prabhupada explains that sometimes one may lose his memory. One may lose his memory. One may forget that he has a father, he has his family, isn't it? So, but once the memory is revived, immediately that connection is re-established. Connection is always there, only thing is he has forgotten. The child, the son may forget because of whatever reason. But that sambandha is always there. So one just has to revive that relationship. So this is a very important part of sambandha jnana, to understand what is the cause of our forgetting our relationship with the Supreme Lord. It is avidya, ignorance. And how this ignorance works in this material world. Aham mameti. It begins with our identifying ourselves with this body, and then it expands further. That anything in connection with this body is mine. So this is very nicely explained in Bhagavatam. Pumsam striya maithuni bhavam etat tayo mithor hriday granthi rahur. So there it explains how in this material world this aham mameti expands. It is when the living entity wants to enjoy, and in that enjoying spirit, when man and woman unite in a relationship, pumsam striya maithuni bhavam etat, then what happens? Tayo mitho hriday granthi rahur. Immediately there is a knot of attachment created in the heart. Actually, it is very interesting to analyze this. Prabhupada gives this example. He says, let us say before marriage, girl was living somewhere, boy was living somewhere. There was no attraction between them. There was no relationship between them. But once the knot is tied, then attachment develops. Isn't it? So if one analyzes that, let us say for example, one gets married at the age of 25, 26. That 25 years back, I was living somewhere else and the woman was living somewhere else. Isn't it? But now, once the relationship is established, then immediately this I begins to expand into mine. Earlier it was I, aham. The moment there is a relationship with this body with another person, then it is called mama iti. Me and mine. Aham mameti. Then further what happens? Atagraha. So then house is required. Husband and wife. When woman and man unite together in a relationship, the next thing is apartment, house is required. Atagraha, kshetra, some land is required. Suta, children are required. Apta, relatives are required. Janasya mohoyam aham mameti. And thus one gets caught in mohoyam, in illusion. Actually, I had no relation with that woman, I had no relation with that family of that woman. But now all of them are mine. Father-in-law, mother-in-law and their sister-in-law, brother-in-law, this law. Isn't it? So how the whole illusion expands is very nicely explained in Srimad Bhagavatam. And the cause of all this, so what happens is when this expands, this Hridaya Granthi, it becomes more and more knotted. You know, sometimes Prabhupada explains this, that in order to tie something very tightly, you don't put just one knot. Again you will pull it, again you will put one more knot, so that it becomes very, very rigid. So like this, we are creating knot after knot. And the first knot began with aham, misidentifying ourselves with this body. And that is why it is very important, first of all, to understand I am not this body. Then automatically that illusion, aham mameti's illusion, will go away. And that is what Krishna is doing in Bhagavad Gita. The very first thing, because Arjuna's reaction of not performing his duty is based on this me and mine conception. I am this material body and they are my kinsmen. If you read the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, you can see that. Arjuna's bewilderment is out of his misunderstanding and illusion. That the people who are standing before him, they are his kith and kins. And how he can be happy? by killing them, by killing his own kinsmen. So the first illusion which Krishna wanted to remove from Arjuna, which is actually becoming the cause of his sorrow. Up to the point, Arjuna is saying, my dear Lord, this unhappiness cannot be removed even if I have to gain unrivaled kingdom anywhere in this material world. Even if I get unrivaled kingdom. See, when we get something which is rivaled by so many people, we will have anxiety, we will have tensions. Just like Indra is most of the time in tensions. Recently when we were reading about Hiranyakashipu, so we know Indra was in tension. Moment Hiranyakashipu was performing his tapasyas, because his kingdom is rivaled by many people. So Arjuna is saying, even if I get unrivaled kingdom, my displeasure cannot be removed. You can imagine the kind of sorrow person undergoes in illusory material relationship. He is my enemy. How much turmoil a person undergoes in this false illusory relationships, beginning with this body, relationship with this body. So if this ignorance has to be removed, Prabhupada says, then sword of knowledge is required. If this is a granthi, it has to be cut to pieces. It's very difficult to unknot it. You can try that. If there are hundreds and hundreds of knots put into that rope, you cannot keep on solving and trying to remove it. You just have to cut it and finished. Isn't it? Many of you would have experienced sometimes when we travel and you are given some prasadam in a silver foil and it is knotted very heavily, then there is no other way, you just have to cut it. And then immediately the knot is removed. Over. So that is why the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is giving spiritual knowledge. That spiritual knowledge is the knife or is the sword by which this illusory knot can be cut to pieces. And that is why Krishna says, in this material world, there is nothing pure than this spiritual understanding or spiritual knowledge, because it can remove our ignorance. So, very simple to understand. Beginning with the first ignorance, I am this material body, and then expansion of this ignorance as me and mine implicates the living entity in this material world, and thus the living entity suffers. He suffers. Whatever activity one does in this ignorance results in suffering. It is just like, very simple to understand, somebody is a drunkard. Once he drinks, whatever activity he will do actually is only suffering for him. Similarly, in ignorance, the living entity performs to enjoy his senses so many different kinds of sinful activities. And as a result of that, the living entity has to suffer. So again and again, either to enjoy material happiness or to suffer material distress, we keep coming back in this material world. That's why Bhakti Vinod Thakur sings, Anadi karama phale, padi bhavar navajale. From very, very long time immemorial, we are caught up in this ignorance. You can imagine, we may be thinking it is very simple. Aham mameti, what Bhagavatam is saying is not so simple. Life after life, many millions of births we have taken in this material world because of this aham mameti business. So this is a network of ignorance which keeps on increasing. So spiritual knowledge, spiritual understanding is very important. That is why every day devotee should take it that I should read, spend some time reading Srila Prabhupada's books. Srila Prabhupada took so much of pain in writing these books. Prabhupada sometimes used to criticize his own disciples, saying, you are inclined in selling the books, but if somebody asks you what is there in the book, if somebody who is taking book from you, if he asks you what is there in this book, so you cannot explain. What is this? Isn't it? So, it is very important that a proper, scrutinizingly one should read Srila Prabhupada's books. And I was just hearing Stoka Maharaj, one of the lecturers, he was saying just few days back in Bangalore, we should avoid reading many books, outside books. There may be so many other books. There will be books of many other acharyas. But until and unless we read it in parampara, we will not be able to reach a proper conclusion. So, there are enough books which Srila Prabhupada has given, and we should nicely try to read them. And whenever you read, it is very good if you can take down notes in it. There is a difference between systematic and simply reading something. When you read systematically, just like if you see Bhagavad Gita, it's a very systematic analysis. Arjuna's arguments and Krishna's answers to those arguments. It is very interrelated. Each and every chapter is very much interrelated. How Krishna progresses from removing the illusion of Arjuna and then making him to understand how he is actually related to the Supreme Personality of Godhead in loving devotional service. So, make notes, and the best way to remember whatever you have read is to preach and speak out to people. I was reading, Prabhupada explains very nicely. In Krishna consciousness, there are two types of devotees. One is called Bhajananandi, one is called Goshtyanandi. Bhajananandis are also great, the great personalities, completely immersed. They have immersed their consciousness in Krishna bhajana, in just remembering the Lord, reading about the Lord, but they may not travel. But Goshtya Nandi, because they are compassionate on other living entities, Padbhyam, with their foot, they travel places to places. Why do they travel? In order to having a desire to purify the different places, different living entities. Just like we see the example of Narad Muni. He travels in all the three lokas in order to liberate living entities from ignorance. We see how Narad Muni preached to Mrghari. He preached to him. He explained to him in how much ignorance Mrghari is living and continuing his sinful life. How he is going to suffer life after life. We see Narada preaching to King Prachinbari, and he is telling the whole story of Puranjan in order to elevate him, to make him come out of ignorance and elevate his consciousness to Krishna consciousness. So this is a very important thing. To destroy the ignorance of the living entity with knowledge, you also need to have that understanding and knowledge. Is it not? When we understand that living entities are in ignorance, and the first and foremost thing required is to cut their ignorance, remove their ignorance. So for that it is important that we should also have that understanding and knowledge. And very important, achar and prachar. Bookish knowledge will not help you. You don't follow and you are trying to preach will not be very effective. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu always wanted that we follow and then we preach to others. So this knowledge we should apply. We are telling others, you are not the body, but we are doing everything based on the platform of body. Then what is the use? People will not understand. I am not this body. Isn't it? This knowledge is effective as much as we are pure. And that's why in Krishna consciousness it is said, purity is the force. You don't require anything else. With our purity, we will be able to change the hearts of people, not with bookish knowledge. So that is very, very important. I remember there was one Bhakt Bharat in Bangalore. Later on, of course, after many, many years, he became initiated. And his sister was also married to one of our full-time devotees in Bangalore. He had read full Bhagavatam. He had finished full Bhagavatam. But for years together, he was not chanting even one single round. Can you imagine? The whole essence of reading Bhagavatam, page after page, isn't it? Shloka after shloka, whatever you read, is filled with how in Kali Yuga it is very important to chant the holy name of the Lord. So actually that served as a great example to understand how one can have read the whole Bhagavatam, one can quote shlokas from here and there in Bhagavatam, but may not have applied in his own life at all. So that will not happen. So it is important that we understand how ignorance expands in this material world, and the only way to cut out this ignorance is by spiritual knowledge, spiritual understanding. So definitely we should become equipped with the sword of knowledge. Then it will be definitely possible. We can cut our ignorance and we will be able to help cut ignorance of other living entities. We'll stop with this. ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। जगत गुरु श्रील प्रभुपाद की